Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again to our Wednesday night edition of In Conversation with myself, Nisa Bardien, and once again assembling a number of panels this evening on the show where we are touching on some very, very critical issues, topics that have been at the top of our mind. Now, the first half of the show is going to be focused on South Africa and looking at our credibility in the face of the xenophobia that is taking place in the country, also measuring it against South Africa and the ICJ. Now, what we need to emphasize on is at this point in time, South Africa is facing a severe domestic and diplomatic crisis as these recent waves of xenophobia and migrant protests take place in the country. Now, we know South Africa has also earned international and global praise for bringing the genocide case against Israel to the International Court of Justice. And also, at the same time, we are faced with a situation where, looking at our standing, I mean, we have been seen as heroes, we have been seen as global champions, and now we are actually seen on a regional level as a regional pariah. Now, we've seen ourselves also position ourselves as the champion of human rights and international law by challenging Israel, by taking Israel to the ICJ. And this was an extremely brave and a bold legal move that had cemented South Africa's position, particularly in the global south, as a nation that is a moral defender of the oppressed. The question is, with the latest wave of xenophobia that is unfolding in the country and taking the country by storm, where does this leave South Africa? Are we losing our global credibility? And that is a critical question that we need to ask tonight. Of our guests, we are joined by Nisa Bardien, who is an activist and a political commentator, Weizmann Hamilton, member of the Committee for Workers International, Chet Thomas, IRS, Thomas Forensic Investigations. I see Chet is on. We're waiting on Weizmann to join us shortly, and also to Nisa. To both of you, Salaam alaikum, good evening, and welcome to the show.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thanks for having me.
And also to you, Weizmann, we thank you, and hopefully you are now in a better position and you've got a better connection.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Yes, I can hear you loud and clear. Nisa, I'd actually like to begin with you, and the reason why we chose this topic and looking at South Africa's credibility against the xenophobia that's unfolding, and also at the same time our standing on in the ICJ. And I saw a very interesting video clip that was put out by Shade Bolton talking about South Africa and how easy it is to recognize the patterns that are not unique to South Africa, but unique to the people who seek to destabilize countries around the world. Now, that obviously said a lot, because he spoke about a modus operandi, about familiar suspects that obviously are behind, what we are witnessing in the country. And just to kick off the discussion, just your views, and I'm sure you've seen that video clip as well.
I have, yes. We did discuss that before he created the video. So I'd like to start off by acknowledging that South Africans have a genuine concerns. South Africa's unemployment rate is extremely high. Youth unemployment rate is high. About 8 million South Africans are unemployed, whether it's youth, whether it's adult age. So these are not small numbers. People are worried about jobs, about business opportunities, their future, because economic conditions are difficult in South Africa, globally, to be honest. So people are worried about that type of thing. And South Africans, we need to be honest about the scale of the problem. South Africa has experienced, like I said, high unemployment rates, but also for decades. It is not something that is new. So this issue did not begin with migrant debates or that's been happening Recently, or since we've had these flare up happening. Migrants are estimated to be roughly about 4% of South Africa's population. Even if we look at the higher estimates, that amounts to roughly about 4 million people in a country of 60 million. So by comparison, South Africa has around 8 million unemployed people. Even the unrealistic assumption that every migrant occupies a job that could immediately be filled by an unemployed South African, removing all migrants would still not solve the unemployment crisis. So as South Africans, we need to understand that it is not in our best interest to be divided by people or by organizations or by those power structures that want to see us divided. And the power structures still exist today. When we were living during apartheid, used to be openly colonialism. Now it's neo-colonialism, and that happens through economic measures. And you can see the fight for having a piece of the economy is what is being targeted right now. South Africans, most South Africans live in poverty, and those are genuine, legitimate concerns where those people that have the wealth, the neo-colonialists, the ones who have power within our government structures, they are the ones that benefit from us actually looking at each other, fighting amongst each other, instead of actually looking at our situation and finding real solutions. And the real solution is the same migrant that comes to our country. The solution is to work with them in their own country, meaning we have opportunities. We have ways that we can fix this. It is a real problem. We're not saying that it's not a problem, but we can find the opportunity in what we are experiencing and fix it. But by fighting each other, the only ones that benefit are the ones that currently hold all the wealth. They will continue to hold all the wealth as long as we are fighting each other.
Shukran for that, Nisa. And let's just bring Weizmann into the discussion. Weizmann, for a long time, we have been fearing one thing, that this country may be. And the question is, has that time actually come? And what we actually feared most for a long time, against the background of what Nisa had actually discussed and what has been taking place in the last 32 years since we've become a democratic country, and the situation has just not improved for people on the ground, for workers, the state of joblessness, service delivery, you name it, corruption. All these things are factors that are obviously contributing factors to what the people on the ground are saying and what people are demonstrating about as well. The question again, coming to the point of the revolution as well, are we in that phase, or do we read a lot more into what is actually taking place on the ground?
Well, I think that I particularly agree with the points that Nisa made in her contribution about getting to the bottom of the crisis that we are facing. I think that you are correct to say that at a certain stage, the contradictions that were built into the negotiated settlement and the strategic objectives that were achieved, particularly by the capitalist class in South Africa with the backing of imperialism, and the political parties involved in the negotiations were all of the same view on the fundamental question of the necessity to preserve the capitalist economic system that had been served by apartheid, and which, if it continued, put at risk the fundamental interests of domestic and international capital. That was achieved in the negotiated settlement, underpinned by a constitution that gave us the appearance of power without the substance. Now, I recently had the opportunity of addressing a meeting convened by teachers here in El Dorado Park on the question of the Constitution and why, after 30 years, because on May the 8th was the 30th year of the adoption of the Constitution, all its lofty promises to the oppressed majority that had ensured the defeat of apartheid have not only not been met, but in many critical respects are worse than what they were. Now, the negotiations themselves were based on ensuring that the movement that had developed in the 1980s, in which the guiding layers of the working class and the youth had drawn the conclusion that the struggle against apartheid was inseparable from the struggle against capitalism, and that we had to proceed uninterruptedly from the overthrow of apartheid to the abolition of capitalism itself. What the negotiations ensured was that those objectives would not be achieved, and that the economic dictatorship of the capitalist class would be preserved under what we were ceaselessly told is the most progressive constitution in the world. And what it provided for that is critical to what we are now experiencing is, number one, placing the democratic demand of the people for control over the economy, as was partially expressed in the nationalization clauses of the Freedom Charter. And I'm saying partially because what the nationalization clauses did not provide for was that the commanding heights of the economy should be placed under the democratic control of the working class majority in the country. So we have a property clause, the amendment of which requires a 2/3 majority. It was as if the capitalists were saying to the black working class majority, you can vote as much as you like. And you can even form a government on the basis of a 50% plus one majority. But you are not going to touch our property. And they use the term property in a manner as to create the impression that they are talking about everything that everybody in society owns. So even your little spaza shop would be protected from expropriation and so on and so forth. What they really meant was the commanding heights of the economy. That was abandoned even before the elections, that's the Freedom Charter, had commenced. We went into the elections with a halfway house between the Freedom Charter, which was stripped of its heart, and that is the nationalization clauses. And it was replaced just after the first government of national unity had in fact collapsed, after the National Party departed from it, with the imposition of the current model, the growth, employment, and redistribution policy, a neoliberal policy that put South African economic policy into line with what had become the dominant model internationally since the early 70s. And that set into motion a massive transfer of wealth from the poor to the rich, to the point today where the World Bank has classified South Africa as the most unequal society on the planet, with 10% of the population owning 84% of the wealth in income and assets, and the bottom 50% having negative income. But it was not only the commanding heights of the economy that were insulated from the democratic will. A 2/3 majority to amend the property clause meant that 1/3 of parliament could hold the 2/3 majority hostage. it gave them a veto. But that was not all there was to it. In addition to that, the Constitution provided for the so-called independence of the Reserve Bank with a mandate such as the one that we are suffering the consequences for in the form of so-called inflation targeting. The effect of all these policies, in turn, was buttressed by the relaxation of exchange control regulations, which had been introduced by the apartheid regime to insulate the apartheid economy from international sanctions at the time. 19 times the exchange control regulations were reduced. And then finally, the most critical one, or one of the most critical, then but by no means the only ones, was the reduction of corporate tax. Corporate tax was around 52% at the time that the ANC came to power. That has since been reduced to 26% today. So we have a situation where a government elected by the majority and now obliged to provide services in the expectation of the oppressed black majority, at least at the level enjoyed by the white minority, who were 3 times the size of the white population at the time. Precisely at that moment, the government commences a policy that, one, denies it the tax revenue to be able to uplift the conditions of the black working class majority, creating consequently a budget deficit. And the budget deficit was filled by going to the international and domestic financial markets to the point where today the government borrows at the rate of 2.5 billion rand per day, every single day of the week. The servicing of that debt comes to about 1.1 billion rand per day. And because the political and the economic elite are terrified of defaulting on the debt to the mashonisa, because that's what they are, they have to prioritize the servicing of the debt. And the only way that that can be done is by the savage cuts in social spending, in health, in housing, in education, and so forth. In addition to that, the promise that the capitalists had made that if exchange controls were relaxed, the ridiculous argument being that the easier it is to take out our money, the more we will be encouraged to invest. The same thing applies to corporate tax. The greater a proportion of our profits that we can keep through a reduction in corporate tax, the more we will invest and create jobs. But what is the reality after all this time? Gross fixed capital formation, according to Duma Kubula, the economist, is now at the same level as it was when they started counting it in 1946. What we have in addition to that is capital flight that amounts, and that's, I think, a conservative estimate, to 1.3 trillion rand. The borders are open, it's true, but for the wealthy, for the rich, and for the parasites to come and loot this country to the state of ruination that the economy is today.
Yes, Weizmann.
Can
I just stop you there for a minute, please, Weizmann? I see we have lost Chad, actually. Unfortunately, I think he's having problems as far as broadband is concerned. But I want you to hold that thought, because I think you touched on some very critical issues. But I just want, Nisa to actually comment, because, the thing is, we know civil society at this point in time is calling for structural reforms, and Weizmann touched a bit on even a policy shift that is required in this country at this point in time. but also looking at from a credibility perspective, because this is what we want to talk about, and just to try and understand and unpack the question of credibility and some of the drivers for the loss of credibility in this country. One needs to find obviously a balance, because on the one hand, you've got a domestic crisis, but South Africa trying to live up to a global image on the other side. And when one looks at even what President Cyril Ramaphosa tried to do a few days ago, he tried to do damage control. He condemned, the xenophobia that is taking place. He called for calm, but this has been in the making. And I'd like to come back to that video clip of Shahid Bolton, because this was long time in coming, where we saw the US trying to apply pressure on South Africa over a period of time. We know what had happened when the Ukraine issue, where South Africa actually abstained at the United Nations in condemning Russia. We've seen the accusations that were made against South Africa in terms of the ship that had docked in South Africa, weapons supplied to Russia, BRICS, the AGOA removal that has been under threat. So there's been a lot of factors that are impacting on South Africa right now, Nisa.
Absolutely. So whatever is happening now with regards to, the xenophobic flare-ups, that is all by design by Western powers. Because remember, South Africa is in the perfect position. Firstly, we are an African leader. We have been for quite some time. And we have stepped up to be one of the global leaders because we are part of BRICS, a founding member, and because we have shown, to uphold human rights at the ICJ when we by taking Israel to the ICJ. And that is something, one of the things that America doesn't like about South Africa currently, because America has always been influencing it before, during apartheid, after apartheid, has been influencing policies within South Africa. And right now, we can see even the world is breaking away from America, specifically America. America's power is declining, and they still need to try and pull those allies that they used to have, or those that were moving away from them. They still need to keep some sort of leverage that they feel that they can have. And South Africa is in the perfect position. We have trade routes, we have minerals, we even have human resources. The people that live here, they want that. We do have talent, we do have natural resources, we have infrastructure, and they want access to that, because they know that when you have access to South Africa, when you can influence South Africa, that means you can influence Africa as a whole. And that is important for them, because not just for America, for Europe, for the French, for Britain, for any other colonial powers, Africa is where they want to be, because it doesn't matter which country in Africa you are in, they want to colonize that, because wealth comes from Africa. That is a known fact, that wealth comes largely from Africa, and they need all of us to be subjugated so that they can take advantage and so that they can plunder our resources. They don't care if we have or we don't have. They actually would not want us to have, because they have a zero-sum mentality. They want all for themselves. So they do have a group of individuals, those that have the wealth, that 8% that has all the wealth, while all of us have to, either we live from paycheck to paycheck, or we are extremely broke and very poor. So we don't form part of that group that they are interested in. They only want those very wealthy ones that have always had the wealth. It's generational wealth that they've been plundering out of our country. And it is important for them that we fight each other, especially our own African brothers and sisters, because wealth is not just in South Africa. The resources are not just here. We're the tip of the iceberg. Botswana has, every single country in Africa has some sort of natural resource, and we are the ones that are we are the gateway to get to them. So they need us to be not concentrated on what it is that they want to do, or how it is that they want to influence Africa. And because global powers are shifting, BRICS has caused, not necessarily only factor that has caused, but you can see the global south is starting to rise, and America is definitely not comfortable with that. So it doesn't matter what we do in South Africa, there will always be something. And regardless of the president, it's not just Trump, it's not just any president, they will always have an issue with us because we are stepping into our own power and they need us to fight each other.
Absolutely, Nisa. In fact, Weizmann, I think Nisa obviously has come across very, very strong, but also which actually ties in what you've been saying earlier on in terms of the capitalist class and how this country, in fact, perhaps what we are witnessing now is, have the chickens come home to roost in this country. Has this now come to bite us after 32 years of democracy, where we see still the elite, we still see the capitalist class, and we're talking of both white monopoly capital and black monopoly capital, I must add, Weizmann, because again, what has this done to the ANC? It's made it vulnerable, it's made it accommodating to the rest of the world to hold up an image at the expense and at the cost of the millions of people in this country.
No, absolutely. Look, I think that what people are insufficiently aware of about the ANC itself is that it always, from birth, represented a tiny segment of the black oppressed in this country, whose main quarrel with colonialism and later apartheid was that they were not afforded a fair opportunity to become black Oppenheimers. That is why they colluded, to the surprise of imperialism, in the talks about talks that preceded the formal negotiations, that contrary to the propaganda of the apartheid regime, the ANC was not communist. Unfortunately, what we are learning, what many are learning, we've understood this as the Marxist Workers' Party from the beginning, is that the Communist Party itself is not communist. They all agreed on the terms under which the negotiated settlement should be signed for the preservation of a system that has created the disaster that we are facing today. I mean, I just want to perhaps add one further point before I come back to the question of the international context that our previous speaker has alluded to. Judge Dennis Davis was appointed by the South African Revenue Service to investigate the phenomenon of illicit capital flows. And he concluded that the country loses 400 billion rand per annum through illicit capital flows, and that the 2,000 multinationals that are operating in the country are responsible for that looting and pillaging. So they are not just engaged in illicit capital flows, but also in capital flight. Now, all of this is happening in the context of the worst crisis of global capitalism since the 1930s. And as the previous speaker alluded to, the US is undergoing a serious crisis as a consequence of its decline as a global hegemon. In the critical area of manufacturing, it is no longer the powerhouse of the world. It has been overtaken by China. And the war on Iran, the genocide that they are facilitating in Palestine, and also Lebanon, is a desperate attempt on the part of US imperialism to restore its global hegemony by military means in an attempt to restore their economic dominance. They will fail, as all empires before them have done. But of course, we feel the consequences. And whilst I agree with the previous speaker that forces like the ones supported by AfriForum that have argued for in support of the malicious accusations coming from the White House, from Trump, the most corrupt president in US history, a misogynist, a racist, a xenophobe, that Black people are barbarians who are carrying out a white genocide. Those are factors, but the fundamental basis for the crisis that we are experiencing today were laid before Trump and even before the war on Gaza. It is true that they have an interest in sowing as much division as possible. But the 2008 pogroms occurred long before the war on Gaza, where 63 people lost their lives, 21 of them South African, which brings me, by the way, to the point that along with xenophobia comes its blood relatives, racism, tribalism, and ethnic conflict. And all the political formations, some of them funded by big business as Action SA, are openly campaigning for that, from donations according to the IEC report on compulsory disclosure of political donations by big business. A handful of white capitalists have been responsible for the funding of new formations, particularly before the 2024 elections, in anticipation that the ANC might lose its majority so that they could serve as props for the continuation of the neoliberal economic policies and on which the capitalist system is currently based in South Africa and internationally. So those are factors, but I don't think we should overstate that. It is true that the Israeli regime has suffered a massive blow as a result of the brilliant presentation that was made that has secured international consensus by the South African legal team that what is being carried out in Palestine is a genocide. But I think that we should also examine the ANC government and their partners now in the government of so-called national unity, the hypocrisy that underlines it. The South African government continues to trade with Israel in coal, and we had the astonishing argument from Gwete Mantashe, a so-called communist, that South Africa cannot discontinue coal exports to Israel because it would violate international trade laws. Well, Colombia did it, but the capitalist parasites that are benefiting from this are not in the least bit interested in the traditions on which the case against Israel, the political traditions laid in this country, in which that case was actually pursued against the genocidal regime, whose methods of rule are indistinguishable from that of the Nazis during the Holocaust. In addition to that, another example, a collaborator of Israel, the UAE, for example, which has refused to surrender in terms of an international treaty, the Guptas, to whom the country was virtually handed over by Zuma during his presidency. They've refused to extradite them, but they were welcomed. The Emirati royal family has a resort in the Eastern Cape. They came here last year or the year before with the entire entourage, and a disused airport was specially rehabilitated for them and given an international landing license. It's extraordinary the degree to which the ANC government is prepared to go onto its knees to lick the boots of imperialism and their lackeys in the Middle East. What we now are faced with is that what was once a pariah of a country as a result of apartheid is becoming a pariah because of xenophobia. There is nothing left of what the ANC has even ever pretended to stand for. Internationalism on the African continent and internationally, that is gone. The idea of a better life for all has become a better life for the overwhelming majority and a better life for a tiny parasitic minority. And what we are witnessing here, there's no question about it, that there is orchestration of the xenophobia. And the statement that the majority of South Africans are not xenophobic is in fact correct. But I think that it would be a mistake not to acknowledge that the appeal of what appears to be superficially sensible arguments, that if all the foreign nationals were to leave, as Nisa correctly pointed out, the strain on the public service would be lessened, there would be more jobs. What we are witnessing on the part of capital and the state is job destruction, as a matter of fact. That is why Software has embarked on the Jobs Bloodbath campaign. In the first quarter of 2026 alone, Stats South Africa has reported that 345,000 jobs were lost. The number of vacancies in the public service could easily amount to between 100 and 250,000 that the state will not fill, because their first duty, and they've made this worse, by the way, by the adoption of what they call the aim of achieving a primary budget surplus, where you exclude the interest payments from the overall debt. So that is from the overall budget that the state is supposed to base itself on. The result is that there are even more savage cuts underway. And what comes with privatization of electricity is a situation where the electricity minister has admitted that the cost of tariffs has gone by over 900%. And that's an underestimate, by the way. The capitalist class is attempting to save their system in South Africa in the same way as imperialism is attempting to do it internationally. And
yes, I think Weizmann has frozen a bit, and I'm sure we'll try and get hold of him. Nisa, we're going to put you on hold. We're going to go for a quick ad break. We'll be back.
Kids these days are smart, and when you're competing for their attention against their smartphones, you need to make smart choices, like using Sunfoil triple refined pure sunflower oil in every meal you make. It's naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether you're cooking, frying, or baking, you get the great tasting results that'll get their attention faster than the latest app. And if that doesn't work, change the Wi-Fi password. Sunfoil. Now we're cooking.
When the perfect blend of stylish decor, exquisite halal cuisine, and warm hospitality come together, it could only mean Albeit Lodge. Your true home away from home. Albeit is the ideal heaven for families, business people, and tourists, with its 4-star family rooms and other luxurious facilities. Conveniently situated close to Port Elizabeth Airport, the beach, and other amenities. Your stay will be truly unforgettable, as you'll be taking home lasting memories of the warm hospitality, the serenity and tranquility that Albeit has to offer. For reservations, call 041 583 6415. or visit www.albeitlodge.co.za.
Yasin Badat Financial Advisory. Are your financial goals feeling out of reach? Yasin Badat Financial Advisory is here to turn your aspirations into achievements. Our dedicated team, armed with a history of success, is ready to guide you through the complex nature of financial and investment planning. Whether you're a seasoned investor or new to the game, Our personalized solutions cater to your unique goals and risk appetite. Trust in our commitment to transparency, integrity, and excellence. Ready to unlock a world of financial freedom? Partner with us today. Call Yasin Badat Financial Advisory at +27 33 346 2071 or visit www.yasinbadat.com. Yasin Badat Financial Advisory, guiding you to financial success.
Give the gift of clean water with Africa Muslims Agency. With every water well or borehole you donate, your drop becomes a river, reconnecting communities to nourishment, education, dignity and empowerment. Sponsor a water well for 17,000 Rand in Africa or a borehole for 65,000 Rand in Afghanistan or Africa. Quench the thirst. Reconnect the soul with Africa Muslims Agency.
At Dynasty Islamic, we believe your financial future should grow with purpose and in line with your values. We specialize in Sharia-compliant financial solutions designed to protect, grow, and preserve your wealth. Whether it's investment planning, risk cover, or structuring your legacy, our approach is rooted in transparency, integrity, and ethical principles. Too often, people invest without knowing if their money aligns with their beliefs. At Dynasty Islamic, we change that, offering you clarity, confidence, and peace of mind. Let us help you build a future that's not only financially secure, but spiritually aligned. Dynasty Islamic, where your wealth meets your values. Get in touch with us at info@dynastyislamicfas.co.za, visit www.dynastyislamic.com or find us on Facebook and Instagram.
Across Sudan, starvation is tightening its grip. With rising food prices and widespread malnutrition, 8.7 million people are now facing emergency or famine-level hunger. As the conflict intensifies and aid routes narrow, families in Sudan are running out of options and time. The Al Imdad Foundation is delivering life-saving humanitarian aid to those most at risk. Stand with Sudan. Donate online at alimdad.com or call 0861 786 243 for more information.
Listen to something fresh. Listen to Salam Media.
Well, welcome back as we continue with I would describe as a very robust discussion this evening on In Conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi, with my guests Weizmann Hamilton and Nisa Bardien. Chet Thomas, unfortunately, could not make it. He has connectivity issues. But Nisa, I think just to continue, and I think this ties in very well with what Weizmann is saying, but also your calls for unity in the country, because when one looks at the catalysts in this country that are driving the unrest, one of them clearly has been scapegoating of undocumented migrants, blaming them for the country's socio-economic struggles that we are faced with. And Weizmann has articulated in detail what some of the more critical issues are as well. But also at the same time, when we talk about unity and when we see some of the external factors, and we spoke about the United States of America, we've spoken about AGOA, about Israel, the genocide case, all of that put together. But we are risking a diplomatic fallout with our African neighbors. And this is important because what we've seen is our African brothers and sisters and African nations are now starting to criticize South Africa. We've seen countries like Nigeria, Ghana, Mozambique. They've already talking about taking steps to repatriate their citizens. They are threatening diplomatic alliances and goodwill that Pretoria and South Africa has actually built over a long period of time. And all of this, Weizmann heavily critical of the government, but once again, the ANC being trapped, because what's happened is we see the power of some of the other parties being amplified. They are growing stronger. And the ANC has got to such a stage where it appears as if the ANC cannot even do without the so-called government of national unity, some of the parties that are aligned to it, particularly parties like the DA, who we know are heavily funded by the capitalists and the Zionist class, for want of a better term.
Absolutely. That is obviously meant to be that way, that the ANC has lost its power in the country. It is meant that those parties that are extremely critical of our case against at the ICJ, those are the same ones that are driving the same narratives of chasing out. They say it is illegal migrants, but let me tell you something. A lot of it has to do with division than anything else. I understand that we must ensure that our legal systems, our laws are upheld at all times. But a lot of these politicians and these parties, their motivations are very ingenuous. They do not operate from a state where they actually want to see us thriving. I call for unity when it comes to Africa, because I believe that we do have an Africa Free Trade Agreement where there are 55 member states signed up, which is the largest trade area in the world, where we have made a pact with other African nations that we will be that we will be working together economically. And I believe that we should actually place our focus there, because what is currently happening is United States still wants to have a say in our country, and not just the United States, Western powers, any capitalist, especially those that hold power, that want to keep the rest of the world subjugated while they hoard the wealth. They obviously want to keep the status quo, and because powers are shifting, they know that a united Africa, I'm not calling for one president, I'm saying united in working together, they don't want to see that happen, because as long as that happens, that means that we can go without a Goa. That if it comes to that we don't need to rely on a Goa. We have our African brothers and sisters where we are working with. We can work with China. We can work with anybody else in the global south. But specifically Africa, they do not want to see us working with Africa. So this alienation is a critical part for them. This is why the narratives of so-called white genocide of last year, and why they're still pushing that blatant lies. That is why it's important for them to make us alienated from the rest of the world. First, within ourselves, in our borders, they want us divided from each other, and then they also want to alienate the rest of Africa from us, because in order for a leader like South Africa to be able to influence Africa, there needs to be a good relationship. And the first way that you're going to ensure that Africa does not work together and thrive, like you see what is happening in Burkina Faso, where they are building the country up, they're removing colonization from the curriculum in the country, etc. They do not want to see that happen for the rest of Africa. And although, like I mentioned before, although South Africa physically we have broken the shackles of apartheid, economically we have not, which means that we are still enslaved, and they still want to see all of us, the entire Africa, they want to see us in that shackles, where we are basically working for their wealth. Now, I mentioned the Africa Free Trade Act, the trade agreement. But another thing that we as South Africans need to understand is that we shouldn't just be thinking in terms of only employment. We need to look for opportunities. When we understand that the rest of Africa is an opportunity for us to actually make our lives better, to thrive physically, economically, and we're both, neighboring economies where we can work with Botswana amongst ourselves, create that opportunities and take advantage of it. For example, I saw a TikTok video a few weeks back, although the comments were negative about it, but this lady flies herself once a month from, I think, Malawi on a small aircraft. She flies herself, comes to somewhere in Joburg to a mall, does her grocery shopping at Woolworths or whatever, and then she goes back for the day or the next day. Now, to others, it looks like, look at this woman, she's just flying over. But in my mind, and a lot of South Africans should think in terms of opportunity. Why is she coming all the way here for more? Why don't we all just use some money, even if it is 100 people, just clubbing together? I don't know. I'm just saying, just in terms of figures, come together, go build a mall there where she is, so she can stay there, and they can also have the opportunities, the resources that South Africa has. Now, that is far better than just trying to push people out, because the more you push people out, the more others will just keep coming. They are coming here for a reason, because of economic measures, but that is a problem for South Africa, for them as well. But we need to see it as an opportunity so that we can build, amongst each other, and our neighboring economies.
Yes, Nisa, shukran for that. Weizmann, Nisa speaks about alienating South Africa from Africa. And I'd just like your thoughts, because, when we talk about collapsing South Africa's relationships with Africa, and just how important is continental solidarity for a country like South Africa. And to add to this, do under the present governance structures that we have in this country, under the government of national unity, do we have what it takes to cement that continental solidarity? Because on the one hand, we've got this, we speak about an unequal society, but we've also got an unequal continent.
I fully empathize with Nisa's sentiments with regard to the necessity for unity. But I think that what we also have to recognize is that the advent of what is referred to as neocolonialism entailed the preservation of the same economic relations between the colonial and imperialist powers with their colonies on the basis of governments that are not imposed from outside, but through one degree democratic or semi-democratic, are based on the populations of the countries that were previously colonized. But just as I explained at the beginning, the preservation of capitalism and the economic relations that entails globally as the basis for the settlement in South Africa applied to the rest of the neo-colonial world, not just in Africa, but in what is referred to as the global South as well. The entire post-World War II economic architecture and trade architecture was consciously designed to ensure the perpetual underdevelopment and the perpetual domination of the neo-colonial world and the perpetual domination of imperialism over the globe as a whole. There is no solution within the framework of capitalism. And if people are fleeing to more developed countries, those that are fleeing to Europe, for example, from the northern parts of Africa, and those that are fleeing to South Africa, it is out of a desperate situation that has been created of economic devastation in their countries, aggravated by breathtaking corruption in Mozambique, in Zimbabwe, where now Mnangagwa is attempting to change the constitution to give him another term, Namibia and Angola. They are riddled with corruption, and that is inevitable under capitalism. What we need is to abolish the capitalist system and bring about the socialist transformation of society. How are we going to do that? Well, even before I go into how exactly that should be done, the benefit of having a socialist economy is that relations between countries would be placed on an equitable footing. There's no reason why there should be competition such that you have a victor and a vanquished at the end of the day, when through the democratic sharing of resources, all countries throughout the world can actually benefit. And we could raise the living standards of the working class in every part of the world to enormous levels that is not possible under capitalism. And therefore, the call for unity must be the unity of the working class, not the capitalist elites who are placing their countries at the disposal of imperialism for pillaging and benefiting from that through corruption themselves. In the case of South Africa, the more advanced layers of workers and youth in the 80s had an instinct that the program on which the ANC was basing itself on was not a socialist program. And the ANC and Mandela himself and Mbeki have repeatedly made clear that they are not interested in socialism, but in Mandela's words, in 1956, in an article in Our Lifetime, to create the conditions for the rise of a prosperous non-European bourgeoisie. Now that comes into direct and irreconcilable collision with the interests of the working class majority and of society as a whole. And that lies at the root of what we are experiencing. Now in 2018, the new trade union federation that had been created and launched in 2017 convened a working class summit where 1,000 delegates representing 147 community, youth, and trade union formations adopted a declaration to establish a mass workers' party on a socialist program. The Marxist Workers' Party played an important role in arguing for that and are very heartened by the decision that SAFTU has taken, the NEC of SAFTU, to have an urgent meeting to return to their founding Congress resolutions and to return specifically to the declaration that was adopted by the summit in 2018. Because what that will mean is that working class people will have their own voice for the first time, their own party, and will stand candidates in the elections so far as we could even commence that by experimenting with the November local government elections with the aim of the next general elections, where all candidates are elected on the principle of the right of recall, immediate recall. And all candidates may not earn a salary that is higher than that of the average skilled worker, so that only those that will come forward are ones that are committed to the program and the policy and understand that if they deviate from the socialist program of the party that has elevated them into office, they will be recalled immediately. In that way, the democratic control and management, the democratic control and accountability that is needed by ordinary people, that is completely non-existent in any of these other, all of them unapologetically capitalist parties, is possible. But more than that, if we have a planned economy, the 32% of industrial capacity that is currently lying idle, which probably means hundreds of thousands of jobs, all the posts that remain unfulfilled in the public service, that will be a thing of the past. And all of the criminal squandering of the contribution that can be made by the 12.3 million unemployed in the country at the moment, because that figure is higher than the official 8 million, which excludes those that have given up looking for jobs. That we can put to an end by employing everybody, and the Commonwealth will be under the control of the working class majority. We would be able to reduce the working week, the working day, and the surplus that is currently being funneled out of the country by big business would be placed at the disposal of such a workers' government to spend on building houses, on building schools, on building hospitals, and giving the talent that is being wasted, particularly of the youth who make up 70% of the unemployed, the opportunity to flower for the benefit of society as a whole. That should be our vision. And we are calling upon SAFTU to proceed with the urgent meeting that is called, to name a date when the Working Class Summit will reconvene, so that we can commence the process of the construction of such a party. Through what? Through organizing ourselves in the way that was agreed at a meeting that was convened last night, where encouragingly over 300 people participated online to develop a campaign against xenophobia, to unite communities, to bring them together, and to invite what are referred to as foreign nationals. I still feel uncomfortable with that term, because all the people that contributed towards the building of South Africa's industrial base came, by the way, as slave wages in the migrant labor system from the neighboring countries. We should bring them all in the way that was naturally done in the past, integrate them into our communities, but encourage them to go back to their own countries and to campaign for the establishment of mass workers' parties on the kind of program that we would have adopted in South Africa itself. That is the kind of internationalism that I think is necessary for Africa, for the new colonial world, and for the world as a whole, in order to put an end to the disaster of capitalism, of the catastrophe of climate change, and the introduction into normal political conversation today, the idea of the deployment of nuclear weapons. It's astonishing. Trump, by the way, in 2018, during his first term, changed US nuclear policy to give the US the right to unilaterally use nuclear bombs, even if they come under attack from non-nuclear weapons. We have the White House should be described as a place where the lunatics have taken over the asylum. But there's method in their madness. They have to protect the interests of the capitalist class.
Weizmann, I just wish we had a lot more time, and really this is a dynamic discussion in every way. One can actually think about it or discuss it well. But I'm sure, at some point in time, we need to obviously have a lot more, robust discussions like these as well. But time is of the essence. And Nisa, I just want to give you about a minute or two for a final word, please. And because I've got another show lined up immediately after this.
Thank you so much. I just want to reiterate what I've said before, working together, working at building our neighboring economies, neighboring countries, the rest of Africa. I think as South Africans who we have the resources, we have the human capital, we are intelligent, we understand that there is opportunity. So I don't see any reason why we cannot work with other countries where we help build those economies so that people can feel that they can stay in their own countries. I mean, people would want to really be in their own countries. They come here because of economic reasons. And we as South Africans understand that the best. So in order for us all to be able to get through this long term is far more better than looking at it in that way. To get over this hurdle and these problems long term, we need to work together with all other 53 countries, 55 there's 55 member states, but there's 54 countries in Africa. We need to work with every single one of them because we are connected by land. So it's important that we see that, that we do unite in that sense. Economically, I mean, we are South Africans, we are diverse. In nature, we are already diverse in South Africa, so we understand living amongst people that are not, that don't look like us. We understand that, so there's no reason why we can't work together with the rest of Africa.
Well, we're going to have to leave it at that. Nisa Bardien, Weizmann, Hamilton, we thank both of you for taking time out with us right here on Salam Media. And hopefully at some point in time, we will have further discussions. I'm sure, Weizmann, there's a lot more. And, you spoke about the Workers' Party as well. That has obviously caught my interest. It's caught my attention. And it's an angle that I'd like to obviously explore a lot more with you at some point in time on a future broadcast. But for now, all the best to both of you. We thank you. We do appreciate your time.
Thank you very much to your viewers and your listeners and yourselves.
Weizmann, Hamilton, and Nisa Bardien with
Nisa.
us on part one of this evening's edition of In Conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi. We come back 100 days since the attack on Iran by the United States and Israel. What are some of the lessons? We'll be back. Stay with us.